on the agenda, as always, are apologies. I've had apologies from Councillor Richard Auger, Councillor Jonathan Eakins, Councillor Jill Mercer, Councillor Chris Smith-Haynes, and apologies have also been received from Suzanne Zeiss, the monitoring officer. James, any further apologies or notifications of substitutes?
None, Chair.
Okay. Next item, any requests from members of the public to address the meeting?
None received, Chair.
No. And moving on then, item 3, declaration of members' interests. Silence is always a good sign. Thank you. Chair's announcements. As usual, there is no fire drill scheduled for the meeting, so if the fire alarm rings, it could be real, so please leave the building sensibly and disperse from the site for at least 20 minutes or until told it's safe to do so. Just a couple of points. We had a finance briefing. You will remember sort of workshop the other day, 12th of September, looking at items in the budget that hadn't changed from the year before to this year, and we wondered therefore if they were likely to change for next year. We didn't pursue that any further because there didn't seem a lot of importance around some of the things we looked at. However, you'll remember we did ask various clarification questions. As yet, we haven't had response to those. James, on our behalf, will be chasing them up, and they will be circulated to all members when we do get them. The other thing I wanted to mention is the Chief Exec has apparently been in touch with the finance team to suggest that they would be willing to have a sort of confidential workshop briefing with us in about 2 or 3 weeks' time to start looking at what may be in the draft budget. So we're hopefully going to have the opportunity to start thinking about that before it's published in November, which I think we'd all agree is probably quite useful. How that works in practice, we'll have to wait and see. As soon as the date's fixed up, that will be announced. And that then brings us to item 5, the minutes of the last overview scrutiny meeting from August. And I'm going to ask the committee whether they can agree that these are an accurate and fair record of the meeting. Can I sign them off? Yeah. Thank you very much. Oh, literally sign them off. Here we go. I missed that, but I
the councillor point that out.
I doubt it's 29 million.
It's page 11, about halfway down.
Oh yeah. So, fantastic. As the press here, we can announce a £29 saving, and hopefully that will go a long way to solving the council's problems. Yeah, I doubt it's 29 million, but no doubt you can figure out what that is. Thank you.
So, approved subject to that amendment.
Thank you. Okay, main event then. Today we have one substantive item for discussion, which is regarding placement costs in children's services. And I would like to invite Councillor and thank you for your attendance, Councillor Bacon, Portfolio Holder for Children, Sally Hodges, again, thank you once again for attending, and also Kathy Hadley, who is the Assistant Director, Sufficiency and Placements. It's a nice title. Okay, we will be looking. This is an item that the committee asked for further detail on, and we are looking specifically at placement costs, which will include, so I'm just trying to find my paper, step down activity. I think that's when when children are in residential care and then sort of step down into something else, foster care or whatever. Contract renegotiation, again, presumably this is where we contract children to go into care facilities of some kind, development of in-house provision, i.e. doing it ourselves, both around fostering rather than using agency fostering, and also residential homes, and those items should be included in the report. Do you want to go through and say something first, and then obviously we'll throw it open to members to ask about these issues?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to properly introduce Cathy to Scrutiny. Cathy has joined us very recently, in the last few weeks. She comes to us with a long history of experience in managing residential and contracting services, but also experience in the independent sector, which I think is going to be extremely valuable to us as we move forward and develop different models of provision ourselves. So a good asset for us, and Cathy's appearance is very, very welcome for us because it strengthens the senior team in children's substantially. The report that you have before you this morning, which Cathy will take you through in detail, outlines our general approach to what we're trying to do. We fully acknowledge that we need to be improving in this service area, and these are the steps that we're taking to improve in this area. There are essentially two issues that we need to be dealing with. One is the numbers of children coming into care and how we manage that at the front end. Two, and today, is about how we manage those children who are in the system and how we get best value placements and appropriate placements for those children that we have to look after. And that's the purpose of today's scrutiny. And you'll see from the report that there are a number of approaches that are being taken. We know that we have a number of children in expensive residential care. Sometimes that is entirely right and proper. We know that we have not recruited as many foster carers of our own as we would have wished over the last 2 years, and we've referred to that in previous scrutinies. And we know that we need to be somewhat tighter on our framework, and we did bring a previous paper about the new framework for commissioning placements, which was agreed in Cabinet. So that's generally what our position is, but I will ask Cathy, with your agreement, Chair, to go through more detail in the report, unless colleagues just want to go straight to questions.
Yeah, just a very brief oversight. Sorry, very brief oversight would be useful to hear from you, and then, yeah, we'll absolutely be going to questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Obviously, the report sets out the items that Chair, you set out. We do have a step-down activity and panel, and we've actually widened the remit of that panel to include a number of placements and specific cohorts. So they're not just children that we can think about step-down, but they're also children where we can think about cost-saving. But also in that panel, we actually need to ensure that we're identifying areas of commissioning or service, the way we conduct ourselves, that are impacting on our ability to make savings. So it's not just about individual children, it's actually what is this scrutiny of these cases that are actually telling us. The panel is actually chaired by myself, but it's supported independently by Andrea Pope-Smith, who is provided by the LGA to ensure that we're actually managing ourselves in a way that actually has some impact and outcomes. We also then relate to the complex case panel, which health sit on, because obviously there is a lot of young people that we have in our care that there are health issues and educational issues, and so we look at those together. The panel falls under the placement sufficiency proposal, where there are a number of initiatives to help and impact on our savings. It's very early days in terms of this specific line in there about panels to see what savings might be achievable. But in actual fact, what needs to happen is the actions that come out of that panel are managed efficiently and effectively in a timely way. We have the new contract is out. It's going out for tender. I've had a good look at that. The tender needs to have a 4-year financial modelling, and that's in its final stages, which will come to the senior leadership team and to Sally. We do realise that the market that we're commissioning from is facing a number of challenges. I don't hate to say the word Brexit, but obviously that impacts in terms of providers staffing and various other things, and ability to manage prices, so there may be some impact there. The new contract is hopefully going to start in February 2020. We also looked in terms of contracting our off-contract spend, and we have a number of providers who didn't actually get on our previous framework who we do spot purchase with. And although in my report it actually says that we have not been able to seek any discounts with that, we did achieve a 1% discount from one of our significant suppliers. What we've looked at in terms of the contract, the framework that's gone out, we've looked at making sure that anybody who's on our framework we will not spot purchase from, and so we actually have managed it so there's a tier system where we hope that all of our providers will get onto the framework going forward. Obviously we'll have to wait to see the end of the framework to see what in terms of cost impact that has. We have been developing our in-house provision, so obviously fostering. We have a business rates sustainability fund where we are looking at developing a fostering service for adolescents. That is in progress in terms of managing what that system might look like, what that offer is to our carers, and we're developing that. The forecast saving for that was 240k. That's going to be expected to be maintained. However, there has been some slippage in the project delivery, and so there's no savings attached to that currently at this point. With regard to the residential development, Northampton Road is ready for occupation. We are waiting for Ofsted to register. I spoke with Ofsted yesterday in relation to Northampton Road and also Thornton House.
Sorry, could you say where Northampton Road and Thornton House are, please? Just so, because I've no idea.
They're in Wellingborough. Yeah.
So it's not Wellingborough? Oh, right.
No, I don't know. Sorry. Sorry. So obviously the registration of Ofsted does impact in terms of being able to get the houses up to occupancy, although we have actually managed to place a young man in Thornton House with Ofsted's knowledge. But I spoke to Ofsted yesterday and we now are on track to get them up and registered. And the issues around that was a mixture of systems. You can only apply on a system, and the system was not working for us, but equally in terms of them picking up and running with it in a timely way. 240k forecast is achievable. It's a reasonable assumption with the progress of the homes currently. With regards to the unaccompanied asylum seekers, Hood Street, we've got still at full capacity. We've identified a further property, Ivy Road, and we're just finalising the contracts for rental agreements on that. A third property has been identified in Adams Avenue, and we're going to look at rental for that. We reported deliverable savings in period 4 for 68k. That might improve slightly for period 5, and some of that is in terms of being able to get the homes occupied in a timely way. The 4-year effect is probably unlikely to be realised. It was a 200k savings because we would need to probably source an additional 1 to 3 homes to actually realise that. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we come on to questions then, and I've got Victoria already waiting. This is where I sort of show my ignorance as just a layperson and don't understand all the service delivery stuff. So I'm going to try and start them, take them in order. I think that's probably useful. So step down activity, that's the first one. And again, this is where children are coming out of residential care, going into a less busy environment, something a bit more family orientated one way or the other. You were talking about the various panels involved in this, and if I'm right, what you've done is change the way it did happen, and you've now got a placement commissioning review panel. Am I right in thinking that that's an approach that worked in adult social care and you've sort of replicated and sort of copying what they're doing there?
Sorry,
Please.
Chair. Yes, you're right. We did have an adult service colleague help us when we were establishing these panels a few weeks ago, because we know that they set that up when they were in a similar predicament 2 to 3 years ago, as I understand it, and found the panel mechanism that they adopted very supportive and very helpful. So they were certainly present in our first few panels to help us as we set them up.
Okay.
I think the addition of the independent chair is helpful because that brings a degree of external rigour into the system. To make sure that when we are looking at children and young people, and we discuss the cases in some detail, to make sure that whatever recommendations come out of that panel are not only financially helpful, but more importantly, or as importantly, suitable for that child. So we have to be very clear that we still maintain a safe and suitable arrangement for any individual young person. And I suppose just for the avoidance of doubt, those panels aren't just looking at children in residential care. They're looking at children who might be in IFA care that could be in something else, or children that have just come in and we can get them straight back out very quickly. So that we're keeping a kind of fairly broad view about how we might use the panel going forward.
It's IFA care, did you say?
Independent fostering agency.
Oh, right, thank you. Okay. Right, so going back then, new panel, which presumably wasn't envisaged at the start of the financial year, but the saving forecasts being delivered from those panels fall under the placement sufficiency proposal.
Yes.
Yeah? Could you just remind us, please, how much was expected, therefore, to be saved in year from that proposal, and just sort of give us an update on where we are with that? Will those savings be delivered? I gathered you were suggesting there are some difficulties of it.
We've got substantial challenges about how we're going to achieve the totality of our savings requirement, but we are hopeful that we will indeed bring our cost of placements down substantially within this year. I don't have the figure in front of me about what our total requirement is this year, but we are relatively confident that we will be able to bring it down.
Okay, so, but again, just to try to understand the context of this one particular one, if you can't say what the actual amount we were originally hoping to save was, do we have any feeling of where we are at the moment? 90%, 50%? Is it all going on course or not?
I would say we're probably round about the 80 or 90%.
Thank you. Victoria.
Thank you. I've got 3 questions, really. One is, I'm not sure if it's the right place to raise it, but is an update on Belinda Ferrison House, and if that's achieving the savings that we anticipated it would save.
Chair, I'm sorry, I don't have the detail on that house at the moment, but I can provide that for
I
you.
didn't. I mean, that's what I said. I think that's just one to put on as, could we find out that that's been used as efficiently, as effectively as possible, because that was put in to save 2 million a year, so it'd be worth us checking that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. The second was, there was a paper done in 2015 on the Property Programme Board on increasing in county care facilities. And Thornton House was on that, the Northampton Road was on that, so that's really good that they've progressed.
Yeah.
Although I wouldn't say in a timely manner, because it was 2015. There was also another property on there that was going to be providing an edge of care facility. I won't name the property in case there's any confidentiality around it, and I can give you the details, but it had a targeted saving on a conservative estimate of 2 million a year and a best case scenario of 15 million a year. And well, you'd understand when I say about an edge of care facility, and that doesn't seem to be making an appearance anywhere. So it just might be worth.
And that was from 2015.
Yeah, I've got the paper. I can give you the paper. But then I think this comes back to all these, the foster campaign, the specialist fostering campaign, and the in-county provision were clearly on the table back in June 2018, a long time before you came in. So my concern and my question is, what has prevented this, right back from then, actually progressing at any pace? Because that's the risk. Whatever's stopped it progressing at pace so far could be the potential risks that are going to stop it progressing at pace going forward. So it's making sure that I understand that you have clear oversight of this and a handle on it, but is there further momentum needed and focus higher up? I mean, we're very distracted on the local government reform at the moment, and that seems to be moving at pace. But we are here to deliver services, and our CEO is here as our CEO to deliver services. And I hope there's not a distraction with the local government reform that's stopping the focus on this, because we have to deliver our services in a robust way to the unitaries. And I've got a serious concern about that at the moment. I need to be reassured that the oversight above yourselves is actually pushing this programme forward. So I suppose the question there is, what has stopped it? Will that stop it again or hold it back? And is there a strong commitment going forward from everybody that the priority is our services before LGR?
Chair, if I might answer that as best I can. Clearly I can't make comment about the CEO, that's a matter for elsewhere, but what I will say is that I think part of the reason why there's been slowness in doing some of this was the anticipated savings, particularly about the residential stuff, was, as I understand it, set up September, October last year, with an understanding that those properties will be ready, available, building done, registered and all the rest of it for the 1st of April, which in my view was an ambitious target and was not achievable. What's happened since then is the focus on getting those building works done and getting the registration through as quickly as we can. We've been pursuing the registration with Ofsted. We've done it personally by phone call on a number of occasions to get it over the line. We have taken a slight risk in putting a young person in one of those establishments because it's not registered. However, he has moved from a current unregistered placement into our own unregistered placement, if you like, in order that we have him in-house and we can support him and provide a better service. As far as assurance around rigor around driving these things forward now, yes, we are getting a lot of support. Certainly the building issues around this have to be accountable to the Place Board. In fact, it was Place Board Monday, in which I actually said I think we take those two, Thornton House and Northampton Road, off the agenda there now, because job done, basically. They are now, the building's done and they are virtually functioning. So we're just leaving the unaccompanied asylum seeker developments on the agenda there for it to be pursued by Place Board so that we can continue to grow that resource. In terms of rigour, happily, the addition of Cathy into the system, because as you know, my senior team, I actually might have a team on the 7th of October, it's so exciting, means that we have got more senior management capacity to drive this through at pace. And I recognise these things haven't gone as quickly as they might have done. But I'm confident now that with the senior managers that we've got around the table, we can drive some of these things through. And already I can see and feel a change in approach and understanding of people about what's expected, particularly, for example, in the panels. You know, change of behaviours of people when they come to panels. The first couple they came to, it's all a bit vague, weren't sure what they... But now people come much better prepared, and they have an understanding of what is expected of them, and they know that there will be things they need to go away and do as a consequence. So some of this is culture change, some of this is other things too.
Okay, I've got Jane and Wendy. Before I do though, Victoria, your knowledge of these things is far better than mine. Do you have any further comments or supplementaries to what you've heard?
No, I mean, I can be in contact directly with Sally if I've got any more questions, and I'm familiar with Thornton House because it's in my division. Okay. So, thank you.
Jane.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions, or I'd like a bit more information on some things, but I'm very pleased that your panels seem to be up and running, the strategies are being put in place, and we look forward to these actions being managed. And I was very pleased to hear that you had identified that as an area that needs attention and for us to scrutinise as well. My question is really about the links between housing, the provision of housing, and the care and support that we give to those very vulnerable young people once they are in suitable accommodation. In terms of housing, looking forward into the next few years, we've got the Business Rate Sustainability Fund, which provides 2 years of funding. Now that will take us to the beginning of unitary and maybe the start of a proposed children's trust. How sustainable is that afterwards? How is that going to be funded to continue that work? And if it's only a 2-year funding now, so that's one question. And the other thing is, obviously, I'm a borough councillor in Northampton, and the housing offer in Northampton is managed as well as I think most local authority housing can be. We have private sector housing, and we have Northampton Partnership Homes. Are you working with them to identify suitable accommodation? Because they're the people, especially, particularly in Northampton, that have knowledge of where these, homes might be, where this accommodation might be, and where it is suitable for it to be. The two in Northampton, Ivy Road and Adams Avenue, are terraced residential streets, and I already have concerns from somebody living in Ivy Road about accommodation for young people living next door to him, and the management of that. And it seems that once these young people are in place, the accommodation may well be appropriate, but the supervision seems to lack, effectiveness really. And I know some of the young asylum seekers, they come here with very little understanding and knowledge of our culture, the way we shop, the way that finances are managed, the opportunities they have for education, how they have not perhaps lived in a house like that in their entire life. And, how much help and support do they get? It's not just popping in, once a day or once a week. And I understand in some of the homes, the houses that these young people live in, maybe 4 occupants have 4 different support workers. Now, they might all, why not? That's an incredible expense. 1 support worker per house working towards creating some kind of a community, a family atmosphere might be more effective and certainly, financially much more much better. So it's the support for some of these people, and bearing in mind that they're going into residential areas, and the neighbours have to be on board as well, because I have had complaints in 2 instances. I've spoken to about one of them to you already, Sally, and that's much better. The situation there is much improved, but there are concerns in the neighbourhood about these young people not being given the help and support that they really do need. So sort of the 2 questions really, the sustainability of your in-house provision, the development of that, and the care that these young people and support that they're offered once they are there.
I'll turn to Cathy for the second question because she manages those services. But for the first one, I suppose the challenge for us is the sustainability of all these improvements is based on us having less children coming into our care system generally, which will release more funding, which means that we can support what we're doing better and stronger for the future. We actually are very mindful of the fact that there is not sufficient housing for young people anywhere in the county. We have housing officers will be supporting us in the developing adolescent service, but we don't have a YMCA, we don't have a St Basil's, we don't have a foyer, we don't have any of those things that other authorities have which support young people in the same way that probably our young people who go to university and live in a residential block. We don't have any of that facility here in Northampton for young people. And it's very unfortunate that it costs us a lot of money because some of those young people end up coming into the care system. Now, one of the conversations we're having, there is a strategic housing officers group, as you are aware, and we're now a member of that, and Cathy is a member of that group, because we need to have some quite serious conversations with our district colleagues about how we're going to manage this problem going forward. Because at the moment, it's a cost that we bear in children's services, but when it becomes the unitary authorities, it will be a unitary cost, because that money will have to be found jointly from somewhere. Either it sits in the Children's Trust, which the unitaries will have to fund, or else it sits in the districts and the provision will have to come that way. One way or the other, there has to be a shared resolution to this, which is why we're really keen and pleased that we are now part of that strategic housing group, so we can start to look at what it is that is required to support these young people generally, so they do not end up coming inappropriately into the care system, which is very costly. Fiona and I are having some conversations with colleagues in the voluntary sector about the potential for developments. That's in very, very early stages at the moment, so I'm not happy about sharing too many details, but there may be opportunities with our voluntary sector colleagues to look at how we might be able to develop some kind of facility for this young people group. We have similar issues about homeless families. You know, sometimes we end up paying rent for homeless families. That comes out of children's budget. In due course, you know, it's the same pot of money that the two unitaries and the Children's Trust are talking about, so we have to get much cleverer and smarter about how we deliver some of these things. And I think being part of that group is the starting point for us about how we affect the shape of those services. In terms of the support for young people,
I just wanted to add that we have now got a member from Northamptonshire Partnership Homes that is part of our corporate parenting board, so that they can hear firsthand the difficulties that we have, our young people are addressing, and hopefully that will make a bridge between the two of us working together more easily in the future.
Okay, Cathy.
Yep. Obviously also there is, in terms of independent supported accommodation, there will also be a recontracting of services, and so looking at what that might be on the framework and what are the support that we would like young people to receive. In terms of, and obviously, as Sally says, I am now part of the housing officers group, and we'll begin that conversation. We've also already started the conversation about young people who turn up as homeless and how we manage those, and the pathway that we should have, because we do have a disproportionate number of young people, 17 plus, who are in our care, that actually it's a housing issue, it's not a social care issue that we are paying for. And so we've started that work. In terms of managing ourselves in the places like Ivy Road and how we supervise that, obviously what we want to do is to enable young people who come into our system to be part of the wider community, but we also need to help them and the community to work together to fulfil that role. And so what we need to do is to work quite closely together in terms of any issues that arise and actually managing those quite quickly. But in terms of the young people, they will have pathway workers, they will have people working with them in terms of meeting their own need, their own cultural needs, as well as helping them to adjust to live within the environment in which they find themselves, and how do they fit in that community going forward. But equally, we also need to make sure that we have a very open and transparent conversation with the community, and allay any fears that we have or any concerns. And I know we've had some neighbourhood comments in terms of Thornton House, and we have managed those by working with the neighbourhood there. The registered manager is out and about working very closely with the community and trying to allay any fears. And we would hopefully, the Ivy Road in particular, you know, is managed and supported by our children in care teams and our care leavers teams, and so we should have that responsibility that any complaints that come through, but we are working directly with the young people to support.
Can I just say that was Thornton House, and that was handled really well.
Was it? Good. That's really good feedback. Yeah.
Use your mic, please.
Sorry. But
Right, I've got a list of speakers. Before I do, a very quick question though. Sally, you just said that you sometimes pay rent for homeless families. Can you explain to me what circumstances that falls under children's services and not the districts and boroughs who receive grants towards temporary accommodation from central government?
It will fall to us because it will be a Section 17 payment in order to prevent the children coming into care.
Okay.
So if they're on the street,
Yeah. But
We
I
would
don't
otherwise have
understand why, in those circumstances, the borough and district aren't taking up that, you know, they clearly would classify them as homeless and that they need temporary accommodation.
the issue, as I understand it, is about when somebody is allegedly intentionally homeless, in
Okay.
particular,
Okay, so
and the rules
rules.
around that, as
Okay.
far as the districts are concerned.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.
Right, I've got Wendy, Graham, Chris, Adam, Cecile, and then I'll just give you a heads up. I'm going to, if you don't mind, ask about contract renegotiation, in particular the financial implications of that. Wendy.
Victoria's mentioned a lot about foster carers, but ever since I've been on the county council, the increase in in-house provision has been a wish, and we haven't progressed that speedily. You mentioned fostering services for adolescents, and a number of people I hear from, one of the reasons is we're not getting so many in-house foster carers, is that the support and remuneration we offer isn't on par with external independent services. So will that service be on par with, will be offering along similar lines to out-of-house foster agencies?
So in terms of the adolescent scheme, we've looked very closely at what's the offer an independent agency would provide, but what's the offer that our neighbouring councils would offer. And then we are pitching the remuneration for that at a competitive cost, but also looking at what's the differential that if we're moving young people out of residential and we're paying that higher cost, we're still actually making a savings. There is also a package of training that will go with that, because of course it's not just about money, sometimes it's about support, it's about the training, it's about feeling part of the team, and all of that is part and parcel of the whole project.
And then going on to the UACS accommodation, to realise the full savings, you would be looking for 1 to 3 more properties. Realistically, is that likely to happen fairly soon? Or, yeah?
It will happen as soon as we can identify properties, and that will be the challenge. And then the state the properties are in, that will dictate. And obviously, again, it will be then staffing and the lead into staffing. And those are the things that challenge us.
Is it very difficult to find suitable properties?
I think yes and no. I mean, it's not actually what the house looks like, but it's the whole thing about, as other county, where it is and what support is and how much time and effort we need to spend on doing anything to the property or not, as the case may be. I mean, I think it's probably one of the areas where we think we might have the most success, to be fair. Now, if you like, we kind of got going with it and we know a bit more about what we're doing and how to do it, and we're learning as we go along about what's gone right and what hasn't gone right. I think that it was a delayed start. This was another one that was listed for kick-off on the 1st of April. But now we have got the ones that we've got. We know a bit more about what we're doing, and we can develop a momentum about that. And success does breed success in this area.
Thank you. Graham.
Thank you, Chairman. I can't believe how many times we've said in scrutiny that full year cost savings shouldn't be taken account of if we can't do the full year, but there we go. In the report, it mentions aligning the panel to approaching adult social care. Perhaps you could give a bit more information on how that's done and what the implication is and how that's helping, particularly if that has an effect on transition, because obviously if you're doing so. Second thing, you mentioned in passing that you're trying not to spot purchase from the homes that you've got in the framework. and that just seemed counterintuitive because the framework ones should be cheaper. So perhaps you could explain why that is a bit more. And just a quickie, I assume Thornton House therefore only has 2 beds, looking at the reading, calculating from the reports, so it's not a major impact. Anyway, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, so the independent chair, Andrea Pope-Smith, has significant experience of working in adults in terms of panels. What the adult approach is very much like is about enablement, whereas in children's we deal with the presenting issue, where in adults they look at how can we enable this person to head towards independence and less dependency on services. And so there's a need for us to begin to embed that approach within our practice and how we do that. But equally, adults work in terms of strategically and are looking at the issues that are presented as a whole, not just in individual cases, and then actually look at what it is that we need to do to make that change across a strategic analysis and commissioning arrangements. And so that's the approach the panel has taken. So 1 week is very much about cases and learning about what does that tell us about the individuals, but what does that also tell us about our practice, but also our commissioning strategies. The second week is all about how do we make sure that we manage the things that have come out of the first panel, we're making sure that we're addressing those in terms of commissioning and strategy. And that's the approach that Andrea has supported currently. Okay.
Looking forward to transition.
Yeah, so transitions, obviously, I'm beginning to work with adults because obviously if we start looking at enablement, we're looking at enabling across into adults, because obviously what we all know is children get to adult services and it's like a cliff for parents, they fall off there. But in actual fact, what we've done is probably not looked at as an adult, what would this child need and how do we enable them to receive the services to support them through to some form of independence or some less dependency on services. And so we need to look from how our practice works right at the front door and how we assist parents and families to manage the challenges that they have, but actually look at what's the impact further down in that child's life and how do we manage that. So we're working dovetailing with adults and how they approach.
So, I mean, I seem to remember one of your predecessors a few years ago saying that something like 80 or 90% of children in care go back to their parents when they get to 18. It was some fantastic figure compared to what. So for what you're saying, you're working with the family if they're actually in care. You're still working with the family to in case that happens.
I was thinking more particularly about children with disabilities and the high costs. In terms of, yes, you're absolutely right, those children that come into care, particularly sort of 15 and upwards, they are more likely to go home when they end their care period. And so I think in some ways we need to work with families to look at, is there a way that they can go home earlier in terms of, but manage the risks and the reasons why they came in the first place. And what is it that we think we're going to achieve by a child being in care, or what is it that we think we need to support families and we need to manage that risk with that young person?
Can I just add also that Councillor Morris, who's just recently taken over the adults portfolio, and myself have been meeting with officers to actually monitor the transition period for those that Cathy mentioned, the disability children who are going to still be disabled when they're adults. And we're getting a policy together whereby they talk to each other at about 15 instead of waiting until they're 18. So that we have had our first meeting on those lines already, so we are making movements in that area.
In terms of spot purchasing, so we have individuals on our contract currently, not the new contract, who we then also spot purchase from. And the reason we seem to be spot purchasing from is because the categorisation, which is not really how I'd like to do this, but the categorisation of the young person means they don't fulfil in our contract, and so the independent organisations require us to spot purchase them. I have worked with the framework and have adjusted the categorisation of young people in terms of standard placements and more complex placements. And in the contract, we are saying that if you are on the contract, we will not spot purchase outside of this contract. That's how it stands. So there's that area. But also what happens is you work with a large organisation that has several different offices or offers, and they perceive that they have ended up on this contract with this office, but they haven't ended up on the contract with that office. And in actual fact, the contract now, it will clearly say that if you are on there as an overall company, any purchase we have from you will be on this framework. We will not transition outside. And that's how we end up spot purchasing from people that are on our framework currently.
So do you have, when you're spot purchasing, have you got a contract or a separate price agreement, for instance, with a separate body of providers? Is that separately?
Yeah, there are a number of providers who are not on our contract because they didn't meet our standard. Now, in terms of the demand that we have, there are times that we have to step out of that.
Thank you. Chris, and then after that I've got Adam, Cecile and myself. Chris.
Thank you very much, Chair. Sorry about this. I want to return to the subject of recruitment of in-house foster carers, and specifically try, and I appreciate I may have asked this question before to those of you who've been here before, but in any case, I'd like to get an understanding of exactly what our current foster carer recruitment function is. Are you able to describe that function to us? For instance, how many staff do we have currently working full-time on foster care recruitment, and how many full-time equivalents is that? What's the budget of the function? What activities do they undertake? Are there any key performance indicators that particular function works to? Are there any targets set? Is there anything you can tell us on that to help with understanding, please?
Yes, there is a recruitment team who also conduct assessments, so the 4 MEC assessments that need to happen. I have started a review of the fostering service and that recruitment team, and looked at performance indicators and our timeliness. And I guess in essence that's perhaps what I bring to the table, is working within that independent sector and being able to marry up the two of how we manage ourselves currently in Northamptonshire in terms of recruitment and how we might do it in the future. And I think there are a lot of concepts and how we conduct and manage ourselves in our recruitment team that could be developed so that we are more effective and more efficient. That said, we do receive about 35 inquiries a month. So I suppose the positive is there is a supply chain. How we manage that supply chain needs to be looked at. If you work in an independent fostering agency, they will be out visiting that inquirer within 3 days of an inquiry. We currently are very slow. If you're an independent agency, you will be doing that assessment within 4 months. We probably average 6 or over 6 months. And so there are things that we need to do. Now, I don't want to give the impression that the workforce aren't working hard. I think I would say that the workforce may not be concentrating on the things we would like them to concentrate on. And so I am beginning to work with across the whole of the fostering piece, but particularly in terms of recruitment. And if we go back, which was your other question in terms of marketing and what does that look like, the last independent agencies that I had oversight for their recruitment, we did nothing externally, everything was done online. It was all done through Facebook, it was all done through social media. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly what Northamptonshire needs, but our presence in that area is very minimal, and so we need to look at developing those areas.
I think the social media aspect of it is somewhere where we can, as councillors, all help. I certainly do my best, but I'm only one person. Whenever you see something on social media from Northamptonshire County Council talking about foster carers, you should share it with all of your friends. And I always put on there, you could make a difference to a child's life, and just share it. And actually that's a really simple thing that we could all members could do, and that would actually make 35, 70 or 80 in no time.
Agreed, and indeed I have retweeted on more than one occasion our foster care recruitment activities and our encouragement to people. So I appreciate you may not have the answer readily available. I was wondering how many people we're talking about actually work on the function. I would be interested to know. And I'll tell you why I ask. In the information we received, which we had a look at recently about budgets that hadn't changed, one of the items was a cost centre described as foster care recruitment and training, for which the total budget in 1920 was £110,000, split between supplies and services £50,000 and other £60,000, which implies nobody is employed directly by this authority to work on foster care recruitment and training, because there was nothing in the column for staff salaries, payroll costs, so whatever the column is headed as. I'm sure that's not necessarily the case, but it was worrying. To me, that something like that function is a spend to save. You know, in theory, you know, we do a little bit more in our recruitment activity. We can deal, as you said, with the problem where we're not competitive with the agencies in terms of how quickly we process people and talk to them. And that probably means we're losing people to agencies because they come to us, they don't hear from us, they contact an agency. And that therefore means that we can have our own in-house foster carers, make a saving on our agency costs, would seem to me to be a very sensible thing to do, Chair. I know I'm not really asking a question there, I'm just making a point, and I can see you're nodding, so that's brilliant. So I'll ask my next question, Chair, if that's all right.
Before you do, and I just wonder if the line that you were looking for of staff costs, that may have actually increased because we've been trying to do more, so that might be why it wasn't on the stuff that hadn't changed.
That's not my understanding of what we were given, but anyway, we won't have an argument about that now, Chair, I promise you. I was wanting to know about, there's a paragraph in the, two paragraphs in under the contract renegotiation heading, sorry if I'm stealing your thunder here, Chair, that I want to ask about. So the first one is in the first paragraph, about 5 lines down, there's a section that begins or says the provider market is currently facing a number of workforce challenges, and this is impacting on the prices they are looking to achieve for care and what they're prepared to pick up. So 2 questions. Could you tell us a bit about the workforce challenges they are facing, i.e. what are the workforce challenges? I think we probably all have an idea, but it'd be interested to hear that. And secondly, when it says this is impacting on the prices they're looking to achieve, I assume that's not an impact in our favour, and that they're looking to achieve higher prices than they are currently achieving. Any indications roughly in what that is in terms of percentage or something like that? That would be helpful, thanks. If you can't do it, I understand.
Yeah. In case of the facing number of workforce challenges, I guess it's where if families are stretched, is fostering equal to going out into full-time employment. And so the choice might be where it might be something because of a standard price we pay to our foster carers, staying at home to foster against a need to go out and work in a full-time role. And I think so the market or the attractiveness of fostering as a job, perhaps, to provide a small income is now competitive against perhaps somebody needing a full-time job to be able to manage where they are in terms of a family.
Can I jump in there? How much of this then is fostering? When I sort of read about contract renegotiation, I was assuming it was, you know, other, I don't know, children's homes or whatever.
Well, I mean that
this is all fostering.
Yes, the new framework is fostering, but some of it is residential, but equally you will have staff who come from other European countries who may not now be here, or may in the future not be here, and so managing to bring more staff in to children's homes.
In terms of the price hike, we have to be careful how sensitive this is. And I suppose I can assure Scrutiny that we work extraordinarily hard at not accepting a price hike when we can avoid it. And there are some very robust conversations that exist between our placement officers and providers about the cost of any placement. And part of the panel work is also about making sure that arrangements we have and additional costs that we are bearing on children are still relevant and pertinent, and that we are receiving what we should be receiving for the money that we're paying. So there are a lot of different means by which we do our best to negotiate the price down to the minimum that it should be to provide a safe service for any young person. But in terms of the staffing issue, I suppose it's a bit of an unknown for us at the moment about whether or not the private sector will use any of the Brexit activity as a, I'm trying to think of another word of excuse, reason to inflate their prices. But, you know, we are mindful of this and we do challenge them on a day-by-day basis.
Obviously, where in many cases that perhaps means that maybe that, you know, the way forward, at least in part, is our own in-house provision rather than relying on outside contractors. Yeah. Just finally on the section on the UASC accommodation, you referred to it in the presentation, that there was a savings, but savings worth £200,000 a year were planned, and we're told that it's unlikely to happen because we'd need to provide between 1 and 3 additional properties to achieve the full savings. Is that something we're looking to do, or are we going to not do
that? Sorry, just on that same issue, you're renting, the third bullet point from the back of the unaccompanied forecast, you're renting a property. Why rent rather than buy? Is there a reason? Is this just seen as a short-term thing?
This is because it was expedient for us to do that. It's quick, it's easy. It gives us the flexibility of moving should we need to. It's just an option that we've chosen to, yeah.
Just thinking it's extra revenue costs and all that. Anyway, Adam.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, apologies if I've missed the question from Councillor Stamper, because it is a similar area, but we're anticipating savings of £4 million over a 3-year period from developing our in-house fostering provision. How many additional foster carers will we need to achieve that saving? How much progress have we made towards that target already, and how realistic is it that we will achieve our foster carer need in that area? So that's the first part. I've got a couple of other areas that I want to touch on, but I'll let you answer that one first.
The projected spend for 4 million, I think we would probably need an increase of about, at the end of the day, 40 carers. But that also takes, but you would have to think about what the cost of reduction is, where those children are coming from. So they might be in a £6,000 placement a week, or they could be in a £3,000 placement a week, so that differential. In terms of we also would be looking at your standard foster carer against sort of the programme of adolescent carers and managing that. And of course, what we also have is the mix. So you have a young person who would be quite able to go in one family but not in another. So also matching comes into that consideration.
So are we confident of achieving the additional 40 foster carers over that time period?
I would be, I guess it's whether it's a net gain or a gain. I guess we need to have a look at our own fostering cohort, because I think the net gain is also affected by the age of our foster carers and whether they're coming up to retirement and various other things. Yes, it's achievable if we get some good marketing and we get on the front foot and we're competitive, and the offer that we're offering people is a good offer.
Okay. I just wanted to touch on Belinda Ferguson House as well. Who's actually using that facility at the moment?
Sorry, can you use your mic, please, Adam?
Sorry, I didn't realise it's been switched off. So that was Belinda Ferguson House. I just wanted some clarification about how we're using it, who we're putting into that facility.
I'm struggling to answer that, Councillor, to be honest, and I think probably what's more sensible is that if I produce a separate briefing note about what's happening in Belinda Forest House at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, I can do that for everybody.
No problem. And just finally, Chairman, Sally, you talk quite excitedly about having a team around you, which I can understand. I know it's all been on your shoulders recently, but obviously, having that additional senior management team comes with some quite serious salary implications in terms of our finances in an area where salaries have, in some areas have increased substantially already. How are we balancing that against the public's demand for extra frontline spend? I understand the arguments about spend to save and the need to have an effective management team to drive the savings required. But how soon are we as a council and we as councillors going to be able to judge the value for money that extra salary spend is delivering, and what benchmarks and KPIs are we going to be using to judge the efficiency of that extra salary spend?
In terms of the salaries, the different members of the team are being funded from different sources. So, for example, the Assistant Director Quality Insurance is being funded through the Improvement Business Rate Retention funding. Some of the money that we'll be paying for Cathy's salary, for example, will have to be offset as a consequence of the additional costs of the Children's Trust, because the person who was doing it is now working on children's trust-related issues. So there are some offsets in that arrangement. But yes, there are additional costs generally into children's services for the senior management team, notwithstanding those two arrangements. In terms of frontline spend, we are not paying for that and taking money out of frontline service delivery. I need to be very, very clear about that. We are still trying our best to recruit more frontline social workers and more frontline staff. In fact, we have meetings nearly every day about this, about how we're doing it, what we're doing, who's coming, who's going, how we're paying, who we're paying, how many agency staff we've got, how many we're converting to permanent. It is a constant daily conversation. And it is a conversation that we have every Wednesday morning between 8:30 and 9:30 with the Chief Exec and the Children's Commissioner. So, if you like, everybody's on it. In terms of how we will measure the success of that investment, the success of that investment will be two things. One is that we will have a stable and able workforce, because there's a lot of the drive is around that. The stable and able workforce will improve the quality of our service, and that will be judged by Ofsted. And secondly, we will have to judge the outcome of that financially, because that team will be responsible for making sure that we get ourselves in a financially stronger and better position than we are at the moment, and deliver the savings that are required of us. So essentially those will be the two key areas that will be able to determine whether the investment in the senior team was worth it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Cecile, and can I ask other committee members to start thinking of what they might want to ask for further information after this meeting, and what our comments or any recommendations to exec or anybody else may be. Cecile.
Yes, first I would like to apologise if I asked a stupid question. But one, you say that your supplier, you have managed to save 1%. So 1% of what? And do you think that other suppliers are not doing what it is? How much you think you can save with a supplier? Secondly, we speak a lot about independent agency and us. So how much more costly the independent agency are? Because if the independent agency are not very much more costly, it might be a better way if they do exactly our job to the specification you want than trying to, because we are so fragile at Northamptonshire, we might, instead of trying to recreate something, could we have a special rate with a very good agency for special cases, because that might be. So have we done that? And also, what I think we are sometime, we were speaking about placement. I am on the planning committee at Daventry, and not very often, but once a year we have a planning application for independent foster family. We'll have 6-7 beds in a village. And it's always a fear what it's going to bring and so on. So I think at that point, on the planning committee or in the village, we do not do in Northamptonshire enough work with those independent, or we do not work enough with the planning of private people that exist. And because in Daventry, I had 2 cases in 2 years, that was 8 or 9 beds. So is they are good and helping them to do your job better. So how do you put, how could you get engaged? Or how should you know when there are planning applications for family who want to foster? How could you help them when they want to foster 5-6 children in one house because they need a change of planning rule? And lastly, we have some trust in all villages, and those trusts, it seems that it's little amount of money, but for our look after children, I think they are very important. I sit on 6 trusts, and they all give money for people who need the most, for the most vulnerable. And we do not have, in the county, a registry of all the trusts and how they can be approached for you. Because I think, and I can give you many examples where, and some trusts even have houses for family who need help. So I think I can see where you are, but before reinventing the wheel, have we looked at all what we have already in the county that we don't know exists because nobody has done a deep dive of all what you have in the county? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I suppose the only way that we would know about that is for people to tell us about it, to be honest. I have not sent a staff member off to go and look for that kind of thing because they're tied up doing other things. But it would be very helpful for us if any councillor or anyone else is aware of any service that might be able to support us in what we're doing, then please let either myself or Cathy know direct, and we'll pursue it as best we can. In terms of the planning applications, I'd be very interested in how that is dealt with at district level, because that's another contact. We are not part of the planning mechanisms in the district councils. And any person, any independent agency can apply for whatever they want anywhere in the country, and obviously some of them do exactly that in Northamptonshire. And it may well be that the applications that you have got are through independent agencies for children that are nothing to do with Northamptonshire. And certainly I found this in other authorities that have worked, particularly large counties, because housing is cheap. And certain major conurbations will choose to support families in buying or changing into properties that are cheaper elsewhere, and will support them. So how we would intervene in that, I'm not entirely sure, because it may well be that that is a private arrangement or a separate arrangement through another authority in an independent fostering agency. I suppose the only way we can take some of that forward is in the conversations that Cathy has through our contracting arrangement. What is the development then happening in the independent sector for us? And certainly the conversations around, do we want to, we've made a conscious decision to invest in our own foster carers, but that doesn't mean that we can't continue the conversations with our independent fostering service about what is it that we need. And that's the conversation we're having going through the framework. So we think our anticipation is we're going to need X number of these by such and such a date, approximately, and that's the conversation that's being had about developing things on the framework I don't know if Cathy's anything you want to add.
Sorry, can I say, I ask, do you know what is the incremental cost between in-house and an independent fostering family?
The internal fostering, we pay 382 a week, and external fostering we pay 843. Now, obviously, from that 843, that goes into some of their management costs, and so our costs don't actually reflect that. In terms of our internal residential, we're at 2895 a week. And our agency residential is 3624. Now, we do have a block contract with an agency for residential, and that cost now is 3100. And so in actual fact, our work with our block contract is actually quite competitive. And so you're absolutely right. There is a need to stimulate the market to help us solve some of our issues. What we need to get to is a point at which we are commissioning more smartly and using a market economy to help us solve those problems. Because if you think about fostering adolescents, we're fishing the same pool as our independent providers. And so we need to get to a point of thinking, well, actually, what is it that Northamptonshire might supply as a fostering, and maybe what is it that we would like to go out and commission? And then obviously we might be able to then leverage some more finances out of the market like we have done with our block bed contracts. And so absolutely, I think that's more than possible, but I think we're not mature enough there yet at this point in time. But that's where I think we should be heading, and it is achievable, because even your independent providers will want that assurity that you're going to contract with them consistently. But what we need to be doing is to gain their confidence that we're a good person to work with, and we pay on time, and all those other things that go with that. We also probably perhaps need to work with properties in thinking about, if we've got a really good foster carer that is registered for 2, if they put an extension on the side, we could get them to take 2 more placements. And so we need a system whereby, for fostering and also equally for adoption maybe, that we actually look at those structures and systems. And again, that's something that I would plan to take forward.
So, and what about your supplier and your 1% of reduction?
That's a small. When I say small supplier, it's for children with disabilities. So they've currently got, I think, they've. I'm trying to think. It's probably around 15, 16 placements. They're very specialist in terms of children with disabilities. It was about 900k when I was looking at it, and 1% of that. But children with disabilities is probably 9.3% of our total spend.
Okay, thank you. Contract renegotiation then, which we've covered a little bit. The report in front of us says clearly that the original saving proposals were predicted on negotiating a new price, and that those negotiations have been unsuccessful. And if I'm reading it then, that whatever that saving proposals is going to go into next year's budget. So first of all, I want to know, please, what those saving proposals added up to. What is it we envisage to spend by doing this renegotiation, and what makes us think that if you stick it in next year's budget, those renegotiations are going to be any more successful, given some of the things you were saying earlier about these workplace pressures?
I'm just trying to. I think it was about 500k renegotiation. I would have to check that, but I think it was. It is quite challenging if we think about the specialist market that we just talked about, who didn't get on our framework. They have now experienced a period of time where we are happy to spot purchase. And so the challenge is around, how do we, 1, renegotiate, or 2, make it attractive for them to get on our framework. So we have that challenge. I think what I would be looking for, though, is those providers that we contract with that we spot purchase with, that haven't been our contract, rather than renegotiating the current placements. If we get them onto the framework, we will want them to transfer all current placements over to the new framework. And so we might actually make a cost saving there, because hopefully their framework will be more attractive, their framework price will be more attractive than their spot purchase price. So those are the issues that I'm currently trying to manage and think through with the commissioning team.
I guess in principle, the idea of using these private providers is that by going to the market, we will end up getting a better deal because one supplier will try and undercut another supplier or whatever. But I guess that's about their capacity, you know, whether there are enough places for them to be able to do that. And that maybe is one of the problems at the moment. They've got us over a barrel because there's nowhere else we can go. If provider A says, no, I want this much, provider B might not be able to take the slack. Is that... Yeah? Okay.
Sorry, and there is a national issue to this because there was a lot of research done recently about the approach that some companies are taking to the residential market in particular and deliberate attempts to reduce the supply, which hikes the price. And there's also some anxiety beginning to develop in the sector about the financial security of some of these organisations, and a lot of comparisons now are being drawn against the way that adult services care providers have struggled as well. So we're having to try and keep an eye on some of that so that we have, we can be assured of security about some of the placements as well.
And I suppose the obvious answer to this is provide it ourselves in-house, which you're obviously trying to do to an extent. But I guess the problem, the fundamental problem with that is how quickly you can do it. Yeah. Okay. Right, Julie, you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you, Chair. The questions that I have: how often are the children assessed? And also on the panel, are there any counsellors? I didn't know whether any counsellors are part of that panel, not fully understanding it. Now, with the fostering, with the private agency, and then what the council pay, and obviously you will know this, I thought that the private fostering gave a lump sum, so they would say 300 or whatever per child. And I was under the impression that the council were given a lot lower, but then parents had to send in receipts to claim back. But from what you say, because you said it was 382, do they now just get a flat rate? They do. Oh, yeah.
Sorry. No, any expenditure over and above any extraordinary expenditure, they would be able to send in receipts. It depends what it is, and so there is a fee that they receive as a carer, and then the cost of care that they receive, which amounts to that amount of money. But then on top of that, if there are particular issues, birthdays, Christmas, things like that, they get extra. But also if a child arrives and they may not have a full school uniform or something which is over and above that general cost of care, then we would pay that.
And is that the same in private agencies?
Private agencies probably would pay for birthdays, but they would not be looking probably to pay the extras over and above. They would actually come back to us as an organisation and look for that.
Oh, I see. Because I just know some...
Use the mic, please.
Oh, sorry. I just know that some parents got a bit frustrated with the sending in of receipts, and I didn't know if the agencies gave a flat sum and that's it, whether that was better. But from what you say, they still claim other additionals.
It would be over and above the general cost of it would be over and above the general cost of caring for a child.
Right, okay, yeah, and that depends what that is. The other thing is, because I can't come to any meeting without mentioning retrospective purchase orders, it's compulsory now. And I just wondered how, that I know that they are looking into this, because when it comes to a contract, say, with a supplier versus the spot buys, the retrospective purchase orders do make that, have made that quite difficult to get best value. So I didn't know how you were purchasing in that way, and that's for the whole, obviously, of the department, because this is part of the whole. And also, do we not have a centralised procurement centre that we just go through recognised suppliers who we've negotiated prices with?
Yes, we do have a central procurement, but obviously, so it depends on what we're purchasing. So I can only speak in terms of purchasing fostering. I can't speak in terms of purchasing other items. So I'm not clear what your specific question is around. All right.
How is that going with...
Julie, Mike, please. But obviously, children's services buy in children's services.
Yeah, what I'm speaking of is, you remember we had the meeting about procurement, the infamous meeting, and they said they were going to save £1 million across the board with procurement. And when I tried to raise that with transformation, you said I need to raise it with the individual departments of how their procurement...
Who said that?
Pardon?
Who said that?
Well, I tried to ask in transformation and they didn't know, and I thought that...
I don't think that's what we're talking about here, though, is it?
No,
I don't
that's
think
just...
that procurement saving line that you're referring to refers to buying in foster places and things.
No, but I'm with retrospective purchase orders, because that does impact on how they purchase and not getting best value. I wondered how that was being addressed.
I suppose the general assurance I can give is that our placement, we have a placement finding service who works through the framework and provides and finds the spot purchasing, and I can assure Scrutiny that it meets all the procurement regulations that we're required to meet. But central procurement do not go out and find individual placements for children. That responsibility duty rests with us within the children's department.
Yes, and now I understand
Yeah.
what you're saying. Because
Julie, Mike.
yeah, what I'm asking, I mean, the chair is correct. I'm thinking of the whole, but I thought, well, this is a part of the whole, so I didn't know how staff, etc., were procuring whatever they needed.
I see.
Can I just answer one of your other questions? Just, you talked about member presence on the panels.
Yes.
I am able to attend all of these panels, but it wouldn't be an open membership because we are discussing the intimate details of each of these children, so it would have to be specific people.
Yes.
But
Be
you get to go.
assured, I'm allowed to go to any of the meetings.
Thanks. Okay.
Yes, I think raise that.
Okay. All right. Any further questions for Kathy, Sally or Victoria? Oh, yes, sorry, you did say, didn't you?
Right, there we go. Just because I want to get some context around the fostering, is how many children have we, how many foster families have we recruited so far this year? Is one question, because we're relying on it so much. And the other one was, how are we getting on with our career progression plan? Because a lot of the delivery of this and the transformation is reliant on our staff. We know that we're getting 25% turnover roughly every month in agency, 100% in some of the first response teams. It was discussed that we need the career progression in place to be able to really change that staffing structure, and they're the people who are going to deliver this. And I always come back to this. Transformation is always a noble aim. It's the delivery and change management that is the risk of it happening. So I really just want to come back to that career progression, which I know I've asked about before. So those two questions, and then that's it. Promise.
If I pick up the issue about career progression, and then Kathy can answer about foster care recruitment. We have a very mixed picture about our staffing, as you know. We have some areas of the service where we really seriously struggle to recruit staff, and we have other areas of the service where we have stable staff groups. Our greatest area of stability tends to be in fostering and adoption and that kind of side of the service. So I would say generally that is a much more stable group. In terms of the career progression, a lot of work has been undertaken about this. A lot of proposals have been formed. It is yet to be formalised and agreed. We will face a very significant challenge this year this as you know, the state of the children's budget, we will struggle to be able to provide the funds to support the current proposals as they stand this year. Because the challenge to me is how can you be paying a career progression element, Sally, when you are X million pounds overspent, and that is a legitimate challenge to me. I understand that. What we are trying to do, therefore, is set up some arrangements which might be achievable from April next year. But we are trying to use that and develop the narrative around that as part of our recruitment, that this is on its way and it is coming, and etc., etc., etc. So we're trying to balance the two competing demands about being able to encourage people to join us and stay with us, at the same time as recognise that we're not in a financial position to be able to pay that at the moment, nor are we in a position to pay any incremental steps.
Okay, Cecile, yeah, is that you?
Yeah. So last time I looked, it was in the region of 15 carers, but obviously what we have to consider is the net gain, and I'm not sure how many carers we've had leave the system currently. Yeah. Yeah. We could give some performance indicators, yeah.
Cecile.
Yes. I would like to come back to foster parents and how difficult it is to recruit sometime, or how we do. But you gave us the figure, and you said it's £382 that you pay a week per parents. So that is roughly 20,000 a year. When you look at Northamptonshire in terms of employment and the median, even in more affluent, it's roughly £25,000 per year. So I think we are missing a trick there. You need to have the skill for the foster parents. But when you say that sometimes people compete between going back to work or looking after a child, if they love to look after a child, well, £18,000 if they have the house a year, which is tax-free, in comparison of going to work in a school or in a things, it's quite a good income. So my thing is how, because whenever I see about fostering, it's nice to foster. No, it's a good income too. Until we are honest about fostering is also a good income, and it's not just the fluffy people who are, that has gone. It is an income, and we have to be honest about it. And if you have 2 children, you are earning 40,000 a year. So could we have something a bit more dynamic and honest? It's a career path. Thank you. Could you answer that?
Absolutely. I don't disagree. And foster carers that I have worked with 3-4 placements, obviously it is a substantial earning potential. Obviously they have to care for those children. You only receive your payment when you have a child in placement, and so sometimes there is that fluctuation, and so you may have periods of time where you don't have a placement, not because we don't have a child to place, but it could be that something's happened or an allegation or whatever. So absolutely. Our other issue might be is how we promote that, and the view that our young people would have if we put it out there as blatant. So we just have to be sensitive. So I don't disagree with that. It is good earning potential, but I guess we don't want people just to foster because of the money, but also I would be very wary about the impact that has on young people's impression of what being a foster carer is. But so we could do it, but we need to do it in a way that manages those two issues.
Thank you, and I totally agree. I don't care how much they pay, I wouldn't do it. Wendy.
Yeah, I would just have concerns about putting out payments. I would hate to be a child and think that somebody was only looking after me because they were being paid. So that is, it might happen, but it might happen, but it might happen, but you wouldn't want to be the child that thought that that was the only reason somebody was looking after you.
Okay. Cecile.
That was the only reason. But let's face it, if you have 3 children in care, is 80,000 free of tax. That is equivalent of 110,000 before tax if you are in a job. So now do tell me, and you might reconsider, if you have 5 children, you are on 200. Yeah. Yeah. So I think I agree with you. We need to be a balanced approach.
You make a point, and obviously it's for consideration. Any further questions on the report we have in front of us today before we let our witnesses leave? No? Okay, in that case... Oh, sorry.
So I was just going to say,
Fiona.
Chairman, that I think that you can see that Sally and I are very happy to have Cathy in our presence. She's been with us 3 weeks. So her knowledge of our business from the 3 weeks that she's been here and the pressures that we were under is enormous, how she's picked them all up. So we are all exceedingly pleased to have Cathy, and she survived her first scrutiny.
Thank you. We're extremely pleased to have her before us today. Okay, thank you very much, Cathy, Sally and Fiona. It's now for the rest of us to consider what we want to do, having heard all this and having looked at the report before you. So, do we want to... I'll just wait a second. Conversations are going on. Okay.
Just to warn you, if you have someone else here, I've knocked my glass of water over, which is my thing.
I need a gavel. I do need a gavel. Can we have a whip round to get me one? Okay, thank you again. Thank you very much. Right, so guys, we need to work out where we go from here. Do we, first of all, are there any further questions? Victoria, you've got one or two, I'm sure, that we can get a written briefing on, get further information. Do we have any comments, any recommendations, anything we want to send either to Cabinet or for anybody else for that matter on what we've heard? We're specifically looking today about the budget implications of placements. I mean, I was taken, for example, when I first started about the sort of step-down activity, and then also we had further discussions on agencies. I got the impression that maybe some of the budget saving proposals